Okay, now we've got our panelists and audience together. So I'll just rehash briefly what I said to the panelists. So this is something we've done for the first and second modules that's worked out and been quite fun actually. We get the panelists from the plenary and the two panels that can join, and we have most of them here, which is great. And then participants from the audience, and so it's a chance to follow up, little crosstalk between the panelists and the audience. So if you have a question, just raise your hand or unmute yourself. But while you're thinking of those, let me start and thank everyone for their great participation today. It was a really robust and very rich conversation on how this has impacted us, your respective folks. We've all been in this for the past 9 months, and we're all kind of shaking our heads that it's been 9 months and it's not ending anytime soon. But the discussion was robust today on a number of, on the stickiness. There seems to be a strong consensus that a lot of this is going to stick in terms of how we're doing business today. But it's finding that balance between in-person and virtual, finding it for government and industry. There was talk on the most recent panel on remote workforce, and how just because the environment has changed, there's still some big challenges. We still have a tight labor market, and a lot of actually companies had already been doing some of this. So the balance going forward. But what I wanted to do is throw out a question that we discussed in the last panel, but it's a question on the vaccine. So I have a provocative hypothesis or thesis that much like the pandemic came upon us in March and all of a sudden stopped everything immediately. I'm given the production rate and the approvals that are imminent on these vaccines, and the work that's been done to grease the skids for the supply chains and for the delivery of these. There's a very strong possibility that we could have, even the director of Operation Warp Speed, who's not a political appointee but a scientist, has said we could reach herd immunity in May. So we could have tremendous changes with the vaccine. And what does that mean for us? Are we able to, are we going to do comfortable with this? And then there's a question of how much can we enforce the vaccine? So I wanted to kind of throw that out for the panelists to think of, to think about or remark on as how is that going to have, because it's not going to be a quick. We all return, but what are some of the dynamics that we need to work through for our respective agencies and companies?
I'll be happy to kick that off. With regards to what does it mean even after the vaccine has already been given?
Misty, could you introduce yourself? This is Misty Sedano. Oh, she directs the workforce for DoD. She was on our most recent panel, but yeah. So,
thank you. Got to keep me straight. I can kick this off for the what does it mean even after we have vaccines and folks have already taken them? We're seeing a large piece of our workforce that are very interested in kind of prolonging the use of a remote work environment and being able to work from other places outside of the location of the organization in which is hiring them, where the work is currently resident in a brick and mortar scenario. So even with the future past the vaccine, I think we're going to have a little bit of the social implications of whether or not people are trusting whether or not they come back to work and if this is going to be a recurrence. So there may be some kind of, I will call it PTSD, but it is not PTSD in the strictest sense of that term. But there may be some reciprocation of that. And in addition to the desires of the workforce meeting kind of the generational demands that we were seeing prior to COVID for a remote work environment and having talent that are largely dispersed.
Cool. Anyone else want to weigh in?
I agree with Misty. I think that even after the vaccine gets uptick, it's going to be a matter of people's comfort levels and their risk tolerance. Everybody has different levels of comfortability, and within the last panel, Misty had talked about certain operational requirements where vaccines were required, and I was in the Marines and required to get certain vaccines. I think around the time anthrax came out, so been in that environment before, but within private business, it's kind of a no to ask a health question, I think, and so I think there's going to be a difference, based on the type of organization you're in, on whether or not you're going to have that information, and whether or not someone's even going to want to give it to you or not. Because like I mentioned before, I think people are either going to be they're either going to want to run out and get it the very first day they can, or they're not going to get it at all because they think it was rushed to market, and they're not comfortable with it. Even those people that have all their kids who are vaccinated and wouldn't consider themselves anti-vaxxers, I think are some people. There's still a population of people that are suspect, and so I think that will also drive some of the return to work.
Gotcha. Okay. No, okay. We were here. Some folks can't hear, but yeah, is the sound okay now for participants? I think, okay, now it's working. All right. I think we're good. Okay, super. Okay. Another topic I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on. I don't know, is Jim Shermer on?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you great.
Okay.
So Jim is the deputy PO at Ground Combat Systems in Warren, Michigan. So he's building the Bradley and the replacement for the Bradley and all these other good stuff. He, in his discussion on kind of contract performance, there was a lot of discussion on was it REAs, or requests for equitable adjustments, and then Section 3610, which is the ability to reimburse contractors for performance, which is something that Kim Harrington lived that dream for 6 months, writing the rules for implementing that. So I have a broad question on this: is that 3610's got an obvious problem where nothing's been appropriated from, it's been authorized, but nothing's been appropriated. And REAs, I think, are just are done, based on, whatever funding you have. I mean, I get the intent of this, but are we going to make it overly is it too much for us to say we need to do all this analysis and all the REAs, or is it better for us to come up with some way to some set of categories to to make this simpler, so we don't spend so much time kind of recovering from this pandemic by making it difficult on ourselves? So I want to kind of throw that out and get your respective thoughts on that.
Well, Jerry, it's something that we've worried about a lot in terms of the impact to the acquisition workforce and obviously the companies. If we had to do contract by contract negotiations, you literally could be talking tens of thousands of individual activities, maybe hundreds of thousands of individual activities, and you could sort of make the case that that's all we would do, and we wouldn't buy anything that we needed for readiness or modernization efforts if we were just embroiled in that. The department still maintains, and I had this discussion with staffers last Friday again, and we are planning on having another meeting with them shortly, that the department needs an appropriation. We just completed an activity where we got updated ROM estimates from a much broader number of companies that represent close to 50% of FY20 DoD spend, and the number came out again to be over $10 billion of an impact, and that's even though DoD has a big budget, all of that money is devoted to try to support modernization, readiness efforts, et cetera. And so we don't just have a spare $10 billion around just in case we need to spend it on something. So we have tried to make that case to the Hill, and to be honest, we've been unsuccessful so far. We've gotten a lot of DoD has enough money. We don't really understand what it's for. And so, we're going to take another crack at it. But if we were to get some form of appropriation, we have, as you know, issued guidance that we would try to, where feasible and where the company wanted to do it and where the department felt it was in the best interest to do it, that where we could look at company level settlements, or at least probably, division level settlements. We do have to deal with rate structures and things of that nature, which is usually at a business unit or at a division as opposed to the corporate level. So we will continue to look at efficient ways to try to do it, but it really doesn't do us any good to roll out massive plans until we know that we actually have money that we could spend. True REAs are a different ball game. As you note, we are obligated in those cases where the government caused the change. We haven't wanted to cross this bridge because we keep hoping that we would get an appropriation, but there probably is going to be a variety of opinions between the government and industry on where the line is in terms of, you directed me or you caused a change to my contract. There are certainly instances where we did, where we shut down a test range or something. And so those are fairly clear examples. There's other things that are much grayer. So we've been really viewing, where do we stand on an appropriation, and then we would move out with, with more firm plans. Although, as you noted, we do have guidance out there already, at least in the case of 3610. So.
What about Jim? The deck plate view. When you've got the contractors coming into you at your PEO. How are you handling that, or how would you envision? What would be a way? Because Kim's trying to work the Pentagon level. Getting money to the rest of it. But how do you see the impact of this on your work, and if others have comments on this as well?
So I guess what I'd say is I'm maybe a little bit pessimistic about our ability to come up with global solutions. I think there's just going to be that natural desire we'll figure out exactly how much is allowable for COVID, add up all the pennies and dimes, and come up with a bottom line number. And whether that's solved at the corporate level or if that's done contract by contract, the math problem and the back and forth debate about what's allowable, what's not. And going back to my earlier statement, imagine the situation where you've got a station on an assembly line where you're supposed to put 20 parts on and you're short 6 parts. 3 of them were short because the contractor didn't order them soon enough, or they ordered the wrong thing. And 3 of them are not there because COVID shut down a supplier. What's allowable in that situation? Well, these situations are all it depends situations that are going to require some back and forth between the government to get to an accurate answer. But getting to an accurate answer is going to take a lot of labor. And the contracting organization, Army Contracting Command, that I get all of my contract support from, is kind of already maxed out for manpower. So I'm just worried that this is going to be one of these things that's going to take a while to get through. So that's the bad news. The good news is the companies I'm dealing with, the macros that are my direct OEMs, are in pretty good shape health-wise. And if it takes 2 or 3 years to resolve the COVID settlements, that's not going to stop them. I'm a lot more worried about the small companies way down the supply chain that I don't interact with directly. So those are the areas I'm worried about.
Okay. Any additional questions or anyone want to weigh in on this? Okay, so I got another sort of provocative question. I was having I was getting together with a good friend recently at a social distance. All right, so one of the things that he, I have a PhD in history, and he has a PhD in similar discipline. And one of the things we were kind of musing about is that, listen, this thing has this virus has devastated, completely crushed our economy and our overall country for going on 9 months plus now, and we've got vaccines coming, but should they have been faster? In World War II, if it had taken Eisenhower to get more than more than a year and a half to get, or whatever it took to get in North Africa, should he have been fired? I mean, I don't want to get political on this decision, but are we as companies and as government, are we postured to be able to respond quickly enough to something like this? And what do we, how can we help ourselves going forward?
That's a tough question, Jerry. I guess I'd start off with this is really about managing risk. And so I don't know enough about drug research or safety trials, other than, like all of us, I guess I've become an amateur reading all these articles that the overwhelming information is available. But it's really about how much risk are you willing to take with people's health to protect the broader population. And that's those are tough choices. It's not like a corporation or the government making financial risk decisions, which is something most of us deal with all the time. But risk for the population, I think that's what really makes it difficult. It would be better if we could go faster, and I think it certainly seems like this vaccine was done much quicker than ones in the past. The resources were turned on. There were companies that were working like products already that just had to be tweaked for this particular kind of virus, and so that helped. And of course, the willingness of the government to step in and put resources against producing vaccines that hadn't yet been proven out, so that we'd have a volume of them on hand if they got approved, I think was a wise choice, and something I would imagine we would do again in the future.
Any others want to comment on that?
Jerry, Jim's exactly right in terms of, it's a risk equation. If you go back to aircraft development programs in the 60s and maybe the 70s, and say, well, how were they able to get a product flying so quickly? It's a risk equation, right? You didn't have back then necessarily, teams of people poring over data, doing what if scenarios. You just you built it and you flew it. I think the answer may lie somewhere in between where we have been in our recent past and where we were back in the days of the SR-71. That went from concept to flying in about a year. So, whether it's vaccine development or whatever, I mean, time and speed often get entangled into the risk equation. So it's really, a discussion about how much risk, you're willing to take. And Jim said it well, here we're talking not about dollars and cents, although you could argue in test programs, you're also potentially talking about human life, but it's fairly narrow down to, some test pilots, maybe if you're flying around in the middle of the desert somewhere, as opposed to the general population.
Let me unmute myself. Okay, great. Appreciate those thoughts. I tell you what, why don't we do this? We'll go around. We'll go around the panelists and get some thoughts from them. on things that you wanted to bring home to our audience that were on your panel, or things you wanted to cover that you didn't. And I'll start with Joni, if that's okay. Put you on the spot. Joni and Kim were on the plenary. Joni is the Associate Director for Acquisition Workforce at Office of Federal Procurement Policy. And Kim Heritage, I forgot to mention, was the former, he was the successor to Shay Assad. So he did all defense pricing and contracting very admirably, and worked about 80 hours a week during the early COVID. And the thing that was amazing is I remember sending him an email in like early April, and he responded in 15 minutes. I'm like, that's impressive. So, but anyway, so to Joni.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hello to everyone. I just wanted to bring up that there's a lot of good, creative, innovative, best practices, unusual things going on in acquisition throughout the government. And I want to encourage everybody, either the industry side or the government side, to share that information. We want to, capitalize on that and get the word across to the other workforce members. We've always had a hard time doing that. Let's build upon this to share that and see how much further we can go for the rest of the pandemic and afterwards. So you can share that in a number of ways. The periodic table of acquisition innovations, I think, has an intake form, or they're working on an intake form. I'm not too hard to find. You can send stuff directly to me. We just want to share that, and it's all good stuff. And see what Kim says.
Great. Let me ask, I know Lou Von Thayer couldn't be here, but we have a representative from Battelle? Can't remember if we do or not.
Yes, Ed McFarland.
Oh, great. I think you're the VP for contracts, I believe, or some role like that.
Yes, sir. I am the VP of Contracts and Procurement, and I'm sorry I'm not dressed in a suit and tie. I know you all earlier saw all our decorations. So one of the things we've done as a company is we actually have a home office decorating competition going on. But I want to thank our government customers, because I have to say, throughout this whole challenge, the response times have significantly improved. And the thought is, well, probably people aren't in between meetings or walking into meetings. So what we've seen in our space is, think about it. Our transition from a meeting is seconds, right? You're on a call and you transition to your next meeting. In our old day, we were very collaborative. We did a lot of stuff in Battelle as a huge campus. You spent 5 to 10 minutes between every meeting walking around. You don't get your email for hours. Well, now that we're sitting at our home desk every day, it's the opposite, right? You see an email pop in from your contracting officer or your core. And so we found the response time, the amount of times that my contracting people deal with their contracting officers has doubled because of the ability to get quick FaceTime. So I think from our standpoint, as Lou said earlier this morning, there's a portion of our workforce that may never go back in the office. My procurement team has gone completely paperless. We have no paper anymore. And we were paper hogs. We had tons of rooms of paper, right? Procurement produces paper, forms. We've digitized forms so it's simpler for suppliers. We've created cloud environments where they can complete our reps and certs just incredibly. And I think it took this pandemic, as bad as it was, to really help push our business to get all this fruit that was hanging there that we had just not grabbed. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. No, I appreciate that. It's great comments, Ed. I mean, I think I forget who it was that I think it may have been Kim, and I know Jim mentioned it in his talk about how COVID has been an opportunity to really kind of tackle things that have been being debated for a long time, like in the question of the contract performance, the issue of wet signatures, right? And whether or not you need those or not. So it's interesting to see where this goes from here. I really appreciate your comments there. Now, let's see, Kim, I don't know if you had to say anything more. You had a couple of comments, but I don't want to, before I leave your panel, if you had any additional things you want to convey.
Yeah, So I agree with what Joni said, and Ed. There's plenty of lessons learned there, but one of the things that I sort of shoehorned into our panel discussion, and I'll repeat here, I really do think that one of the silver linings coming out of the pandemic is the highly reinvigorated national discussion around supply chain fragility, security, and the need to look seriously at reshoring certain capabilities for the United States. All of these things were known beforehand. All of these things have been brought up before, in some cases for years or decades of an issue. But getting sort of a critical mass consensus around the need and an urgent need to do something, I think we saw and are seeing. Microelectronics is probably one of our major focus areas here in recent days within ANS and OSD, and critically important to all of our weapon systems, highly reliant on foreign sources, something that we have extraordinarily poor visibility into because DoD does not contract at the component level. To be honest, the prime contractors don't have very good visibility down to that component level. And so we have to do a lot of special workaround studies and analysis and things of that nature. But I think people are really understanding the importance now. And you can use your imagination if you've got critical components in your system that are produced and potentially controlled by our adversaries. And so I think we're seeing good discussions now, including in what's going to be in the FY21 NDAA on legislation around looking at reshoring some microelectronics capability. And that's just a topic, right? That's just one thing, whether you talk pharmaceuticals or PPE or many of these other items that the United States was essentially fully reliant on foreign sources for. And so because they're cheaper, right? And so, for years we made a decision, cheaper equals better, or maybe I should even say less expensive. I'm not even implying quality problems, but just less expensive is better. And that allows us to buy more. And we really need to look at that from a national strategy standpoint. And I think the pandemic really is driving a lot of conversations around that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kim. Yeah, as you know, and many folks know, I was in government prior to COVID, and we did a big a national study, a whole government study on the industrial base. And many of these problems are chronic and been known for a long time, sort of known knowns. And that study helped us to move the ball on some of those things, but COVID has really been galvanizing force. And you're seeing that come out in congressional legislation and also funding. So which leads actually, someone asked a question on this in the chat. Now, and I'm not sure anyone has this expertise on the call, but they do great. It's looking about challenges regarding supply chain for the distribution of the vaccine. One of the interesting things is, there's been a lot of money. You're seeing the fruit of that coming out with the vaccine, but also the vaccine coming out of the money was put forward, but a lot of effort has been put in distribution and supply chain. And so the question is that going to hold? Is that going to be successful? Because there are challenges. They have multi-tiers just as the defense industrial base does. They have the challenges of PPE production and so on. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that, specifically with regard to the supply chain distribution for the vaccine.
I don't have any direct experience. I don't know if you all saw the 60 Minutes episode they did on Operation Warp Speed. I watched just because a couple of my former bosses, General Perna and retired Lieutenant General Ostrowski, were both interviewed. Marion Wicker, who works at TACOM, does logistics, got drafted to do a lot of the distribution work that they had. My impressions from hearing what they had said is when you start a new activity, it's kind of like starting manufacturing a new line. It's like designing a new product, distributing a new vaccine. There's always pain and suffering involved in the startup, and there'll be hiccups. There'll be suppliers who are late showing up. There'll be containers that break that maybe weren't as sturdy as we thought they were going to be, and how well the organization responds to those and fixes and patches those errors going forward is really going to drive how quickly they climb the curve to producing high volume and distributing high volume. So I think the first month or two is going to be challenging, but I think by February I would expect to see a pretty smooth operation as fast as it's coming off the line, it's getting to the point of need with adequate refrigeration and controls and those sorts of things. So at least that's what I'm hoping for.
Okay, great. Now let's move on to the contract performance panel. Any thoughts from the panelists there? We'll start with Tom, the moderator, Tom Temin, who's who runs the Federal Drive on Federal News Network.
Yeah, trying to put together tomorrow's show right now, even as we speak, because the lava flow of broadcast time never quite stops. Well, we had an interesting panel. It really zeroed in on the day-to-day nitty-gritty operational issues. And I only asked the questions, but some of the interesting takeaways were that there are performance problems that are associated with COVID in the delivery of products and services from vendors. But one of the challenges, and Jim Shermer talked about this at length, is that you need to be able to have a system for separating what are the COVID-related delays and quality problems that might even offer reimbursable cost back remedies to suppliers versus them simply hiding behind the COVID and doing things that wrongly that would have happened anyway had there been no pandemic. It's not a gigantic issue, but as Jim mentioned earlier, if you're missing 30 parts for 15 tanks and they can't roll down and out in delivery without those 30 parts, then you got a problem. So some of those were COVID related, some of them not. There was a great deal of discussion about the different workarounds and communications people have effectuated, both between, well, I shouldn't say just both, first between government and industry, reaching people, and telephone seems to be the way, not as prominent as email. If telephone was less prominent before pandemic, it's even less prominent now. So between government and industry, new ways of just simply getting in touch, let alone formal meetings. Then there's also a great deal of collaborative communication horizontally. Say, Jim's, again, I'll cite his shop, that has to do with military construction, not building construction, military assembly, military maintenance of platforms. There are similar efforts underway throughout the country where ships and planes and helicopters and tanks and so forth are either assembled or repaired or maintained. And so there's some commonalities of practices to deal with COVID that they could talk to one another horizontally, perhaps more so than they would ordinarily be prompted by the pandemic. And then the contractors also mentioned that there's been a lot of informal discussion among contractors, peer-to-peer, just sharing best practices without giving away any kind of competitive advantage, but realizing that everyone can benefit if the whole industry does better. And then we also heard, too, that the associations have been a big petri dish for that kind of thing. And then there's some operational issues like getting CAC cards to people reissued. Can you simply extend the current card? Are there new ways of using derived credentials? People talked about that. And they also talked about the issue of signatures. Signatures are a huge piece of currency in the conduct of federal business between subs and contractors, between contractors and the government. And so finally, I think one of our panelists said, we've seen the final wooden stake through the heart of the wet signature, and people are beginning to understand the value of digital signatures much more widely and putting in the processes to enable them. So a few of the takeaways.
Excellent, Tom. Excellent. I don't know. Do we have Sandy Hintzman or Melissa Martin on as well?
Yeah, I looked through the pages. I didn't. There's 2 pages worth of us. I didn't see them there. Now there's 3.
I didn't see them in there either. But I know we had that. That's a great summation, Tom, for those who weren't able to make that discussion, or those that were like me that didn't take the good notes like you did. And Jim, do you have any additional thoughts on your discussion today?
Most of the panelists have already covered some of the thoughts I had, but one I'd add is I am kind of excited that we're forced to discover some new ways of doing business, new tools, new processes. I think remote work is here to stay in some form or fashion. We're all going to kind of feel our way through what percentage of the workforce on any given day is going to be teleworking, vice in the office, post herd immunity, whenever that comes around. And I was just talking the other day with my park here in Warren. He's been struggling to attract talent into the contracting organization. And we had a bow wave of retirements. We've also had some talent poaching, which I'm guilty of as well, hiring contracting officers away to do PM work that's kind of left them shorthanded. And he's interested in the possibility of hiring folks at remote locations rather than just trying to mine the local economy here. And if his higher headquarters would let him do it, he thinks he could do that successfully very soon. So I'm excited by it. An area of concern for me remains actually onboarding. So I believe if you've got, say, a team of 10 people and they work together on a day-to-day basis, they get to know each other, and then you send them off to work remotely with one another, they function pretty darn well. They know one another, they know who's responsible for what, and I think that team can function very effectively in a remote setting. But if you add an 11th member remotely that no one has met face-to-face yet, who's not really sure what his or her role is, and hasn't had a chance to meet and get to know kind of in the water cooler conversation informally, that person can feel more isolated. And I think it's going to be very difficult for them to do the OJT that I think all of us went through at some point in time and are also doing on behalf of more junior employees. So I'm certainly interested in best practices on that, because that's it's gone on long enough. We've started hiring. We've brought new people into the organization who have never met face to face the other members of their team. It's a small enough number that if it's a problem, I don't know about it, but it's something I am worried about.
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. Okay, so if you have any questions, we'll move on to the final panel. Jim, your panel on remote workforce, I think pretty much your entire panel's on. You want to sum up your final thoughts? And because we got about 10 minutes left and want to be conscious of folks' time.
So sure, I'll try to be brief. And to a certain extent, Jerry, like you, maybe I didn't take comprehensive notes. The notes that I was taking were meant to inform the research I'm doing, right? Because I do want to produce a white paper. Well, I have produced a white paper. I want to revise it here shortly and get it out to a larger audience.
Let me interject on that. So,
yeah, please. Go ahead.
So we have a white paper series at the Center of Government Contracting. Jim has published two very incisive white papers on the subject of intellectual property and government procurement competitions. We've done them on budget reform. We've got one that I've done on building resilience. And then this is what Jim has written, and we'll publish before the end of the year, is one on the implications of the remote workforce. So anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, quite okay. That's an important plug. Here's where I stand with it. That I talked a bit about all the research that's been done on because look, I mean, telecommuting, that's the term we used to use, maybe, right? Has been. Sorry about my lighting too. The sun keeps shifting here. Telecommuting's been around since the mid '70s, and by the late '90s, the federal government probably had about 10,000 people working remotely. And that sounds like a lot of progress, except it's 25 years in a country at the time of like 260 something million people. So progress was kind of slow. And then all of a sudden, kaboom, it goes like this. So when you look back at the research, though, what you realize is that most of the research about working remotely has been about how people within organizations have related to that organization and performed within that organization, and how their pay has changed, and how they've been promoted or not promoted, et cetera. Sort of the unit of analysis has been the person within an organization. And a lot of the question now we're asking is about, well, how would whole organizations perform? Kim, I really liked your point about, what's it going to be like 3 years from now if we stay enthused about this? Are there things that we should worry about? I think that there's probably not been enough thinking about how well organizations that hadn't been born remote, so to speak, can, how they will adapt to this, whether or not they will outperform or underperform those that seek a hybrid model. And if there is a balance between being in person and being remote, I don't know that it's as simple as a percentage, ratio, but are there some metrics we can come up with that would say, hey, this is the way you should manage it? I thought that it was salient that our panelists all said, oh yeah, this is sticking. And there's, if you want to you don't need to get behind this trend to a certain extent. You can surf right in front of it. I mean, there's a lot of momentum here. And so your organization needs to adapt to it. I thought it was really, frankly, it was refreshing and honest for Misty to say, we're losing people to IRS because we have old practices in defense, so we have to figure out how to change that. I'm really looking forward to seeing, just out of sort of research curiosity, how this unfolds over the next year.
Okay. All right. So I don't know, Kathy, if you want to go next, your thoughts, as we're closing out.
Thank you, Jerry. So I felt like I loved our panel, and we had a lot of good conversation about what the new normal will look like and how we deal with the additional stress that comes with being behind a screen all the time. So it's not just about having the setup in the office environment at home. It's how do we deal with the continued uncertainty. And Michael was fabulous at really talking very specifics about how we have to remember as leaders to know exactly what our people need and what they want, what they really need to be successful, and how do we continue to support them in this unique environment during this time.
Okay. All right, Mike, you're up. Is he on? Actually, I'm not sure if he's on.
Yep, he's here.
Yeah, I'm here, Jerry. Sorry, I was trying to get off mute. No, we had a great panel, and I think for the most part, the concurrence is that we need to be, as leaders, flexible, empathetic, aware of what's going on with your people, and to a greater degree than prior to COVID. Knowing that there's a extra level, layer of stress because a lot of normal conventions have been upended as, kids are home and wives and the husbands and everybody's, all at home with all their life decisions, checking in with them and seeing how they're doing and ensuring that they have everything that they need in terms of support, is going to be critical, to move successfully, out of, quote unquote, the COVID environment into, normalcy.
Okay, great. And then Misty?
I think that we could really, just kind of listening to all of the panelists and their feedback, I think that this actually presents a very unique opportunity for us to take the pandemic as a catalyst and start to look deliberately at how we share best practices and lessons learned and capitalize on the challenges and the successes that some of our organizations have had and how we can partner together to make sure that we're addressing the royal we. I think that will help strengthen the supply chain because we're working together to address all of the issues across all of the federal governments and make sure that we're all in lockstep. It'll help with the talent management piece and knowing where our pools are and how to actually manage a remote workforce and move forward into what will be considered the new norm going forward in this telework intensive hybrid type environment that blurs the line between personal and professional. There's a lot to be learned, even just across our panel and listening to the different perspectives that were represented and the questions that were mentioned. I know I took probably 7 pages of notes of things that are highly interesting to me and things that I would like to follow up on. And this just really does give us a good format for us to start sharing and follow on with what Joni was saying and really harnessing those best practices among our whole community.
Great. That's a great way to sum up. I want to thank again all of our government participants from DOD and OFPP, And we've had, folks from GSA and the IRS and other organizations in prior modules. I want to thank our industry executives, Michael Sanders and Von Thayer from Patel, our subject matter experts like Kathy Alvarado, and of course, and our moderators, Tom, and then Jim Hassick from our center. And this was a really rich conversation, and I thought it really it was very intermeshing, even in a good way, because you all were talking about different things from different perspectives, and most importantly, that's our job as the center, to be a nexus for these conversations and to help them move them forward. Thanks very much for all your time, your candid responses, and I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, Happy holiday season, and here's to the first vaccine being delivered today in the United Kingdom, and to it soon kind of becoming a real wave across our country in the best kind of way. So thanks very much. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And thanks again.